Hi, welcome to Toni and Helen's deep dive into the mind. Today we are going to dig into some knowledge, some practice, some experience, and some conversation, real talk around our minds and how we can reprogram it, how we can rewire it, and also how we can find some more peace and happiness through the experience of doing that in terms of becoming more aware, raising our consciousness, and learning about ourselves. Helen and I are so excited to be with you, and also just so pumped and personally addicted, if that's a good word, to this journey of like learning about ourselves and where it can take us and what it brings in our life. So without further ado, I want to introduce my beautiful friend Helen to talk a little bit about herself and how she came to this journey and why she's here today with me.
Hi, thanks for watching us. As Toni mentioned, we're very excited to be here. My journey today has led me to just wanting to have the best relationship with myself.
Yeah.
And what I found was I've managed lots of people, I've promoted them, I've performance managed them. And the biggest thing that I realized was that language is something that we all use. We all have a relationship with ourselves and language. And if you can master that, you can master anything.
Amazing. It's so, I think what's really fascinating about the two of us and our friendship and also the work that we're doing in this sort of, I guess, kind of cross between cerebral, self-help, spirituality, kind of self-development, that kind of mix that we're in, is we come to it from very different angles. For me, there was maybe the concept of emotional mastery is kind of what I have been looking at this, and my journey has been a very Pisces one, where it's been sort of very dreamative and imaginary, and what I believe in and what I don't believe in. And when I started to see, as I learned about myself and kind of went through some really funky things, actually on the personal side, I started to see that the language that I used with myself was the most important thing, and how I could also, as I started to learn about things like Abraham Hicks and Joe Dispenza, there's a lot of sort of people that talk about the future. Your future is formed from your words and from what you think, and then really starting to actually see how I played a role in that, and then how, as I went through my own journey of awareness and consciousness, how I could kind of put in some practical things to kind of catch myself. Because I think the biggest moment, the moment that we have to change and rewire our brain, is in the moment that something is happening. And often we don't click on even what is happening until we start to become aware, and how we gently work through and walk through the steps of being aware in the first place. So do you want to start us sort of how you started to come to that place of awareness and what that looked for you, and how that then led into kind of reframing your language and how you approach it, I guess.
Okay. I think when I first got into meditation, that's really when I realized I was very quick to react and not respond. And a lot of the things and situations that I'll use are in the business world, because that's when I felt like I put a time pressure on myself and I had to do things quickly and I wanted to be effective. And to be effective, you need to be able to communicate in a way that the other person understands, and to deliver them relevant content so that they can make a decision. And what I realized was I had a very different view of how I wanted things to go in business compared to some other people, which led to challenging conversations. And the minute you get into a challenging conversation, if it's triggering a memory from childhood, which was not positive for you or for me, it would result in anger, and the result would never be good.
Yeah.
So the practice of meditation, what it did for me was it created space between what I'd heard and how I then responded. And what I found is that there were certain situations or certain things that people would say, and I would have to kind of write them all down. And then I would have to go, okay, how will I respond in this situation? How can I say things in a different way? How can I remove all the emotion from what it is that I'm saying so that I don't trigger them.
Mm.
And the mandate that was put on me is, Helen, just tell us the facts. So my journey started with it really showing up in business and sticking to the facts. And as I stuck to the facts in business, I could then become less emotional in my life and be a little bit more objective and start applying that to my personal life as well.
So amazing. So many things. Because I think, first, I think I feel you. I remember in my event world early on, someone said, stop with the whole story, just give me the facts. And I would be like, la, 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 all of these things. And I think, you know, whilst that is very me and is part of how I operate and think and has a value, it wasn't effective maybe to get to the point and to get to sort of maybe better communication. So I feel you on that. The other thing is, I'm curious when you talk about removing the emotion, is that because that was maybe connected? And I hadn't actually really even made it in this moment. I'm having an epiphany of like, I hadn't connected it back to the childhood triggers. So where the emotion comes in is where it's connected back to the emotional trigger, which is why you're not trying to become unemotional and not emotion based, but more tuned in to maybe being distance from the emotions so that you can act in a more, let's say, you could probably feed a word to me here.
Constructive, resourceful.
Perfect. Yeah, I was going to say proper, but that's definitely has some connotations with it. But I think that's really amazing to actually, but that has a self-awareness with it well from the beginning. How did you even like go back a step to come to the point that meditating gave you that space? Was that something that you heard from someone, or is that something that you kind of felt in your body and you were like, oh, that's interesting?
I had a director suggest that I meditate.
Interesting.
And they sent me to see a business coach, and they're like, this is what the business wants from you. They just want facts from you.
Okay.
And I was like, fine, I'll do it.
Did that hurt your feelings, or what was that triggering?
So I thought I was speaking in a fact-based manner.
Interesting.
So everything that I wrote was based on facts, but when I was communicating, I wasn't putting the facts in there. I was putting my perceived opinion.
Wow.
And when you put your opinion in and you're dealing with creative people, it becomes a he said, she said, my opinion's better than yours. But when you kind of go, actually, here's the data, then
Fascinating.
what happens. And you can use this in your relationships as well. It's what I find is people say, you always do this, which then gets somebody to be very defensive, or you're always on your phone when you speak to me.
Yeah.
You're always ignoring me. That's never going to lead to a constructive conversation. If you can kind of go, look, the last 3 times we've caught up, you've been on your phone. When I've mentioned some things and I've had to wait for you, that's going to be a way more constructive conversation than you always do.
Wow. So many. I mean, I think also one of the things I wanted to make sure that we were able to tell people today is how awareness is a step-by-step sort of journey. It's an unpulling. I had a therapist once that talked about that we're sort of unknitting a big scarf and we're pulling the cord, and it's sort of like, you know, stitch by stitch. And that's really kind of what we're doing on ourselves. If we think about the wider thing of awareness and consciousness, it's sort of collective remembering. In a sense, we're going back to who we are, you know, who we were from the very beginning, and kind of unlayering all the things societally that has been put on top of us. So, you know, it's a really like a tiny little thing, but even just catching the word that you said, you're perceived, and being a Sagittarius, that is your man to how you operate. So it's fascinating, you know, that how we both have come from innately who we are to be actively operating in those ways, which I think on some angle has got us to where we are and made us who we, you know, certainly kind of helped us get to where we're going. But also there's I think the ability to dig into that a little bit more gives this sort of sense of freedom of like, how do we then use that for a more resourceful result, or a more beneficial result, or something like that. It's very fascinating.
Exactly. So some of the things that came up for me when you were just speaking, if people want to be more aware, having an element like really being able to listen is something that's going to serve them in being more aware.
Right.
When you're truly listening to somebody, you're able to recite what they're saying word for word. That is what true listening is. And then when you stop, and then when they stop talking, you then go, oh, I'm very curious about this. Why would they be saying this? What is it about this that I'm curious about?
Right.
And that's going to create time and space for you to not react. And that's where the level of awareness is going to start to increase.
Interesting.
And you can even do that with yourself. You can go, oh, I'm curious. Why am I thinking this way? Or why am I feeling this way right now? And
Yeah.
that, like, the minute you just kind of go, okay, I'm going to set the intention to be curious today in every single interaction, that's a great way of increasing your awareness quite quickly.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think it starts, if we would sort of roll the tape back, we could maybe look at some practical tips of like how to become awareness. So for you, that was potentially, and also look at the language that we speak about. So for you, that was sort of, I'm going to be curious today. So then in an interaction with a colleague or something, you would say something. So then you would write down how you could say that differently.
Yeah. So if I knew that I was going into a meeting where there was a difference in direction, and I knew that there would be healthy, robust discussions,
Yeah, I love it.
I would write down the things that I wanted to say. And when two people are reacting in a heated discussion, the minute you start talking over somebody or interrupting, you're just going to infuriate them more. It's like you're adding fuel to their fire. And one of the things that I used to do is I was like, okay, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to listen to absolutely everything. And then I would start with, can you just hear me out on what I have to say? And if they interrupted, then I would say, I've heard you out on all your points. Can you just give me time to finish what it is that I have to say before you respond? And the looks on their faces when they first heard that, they were just like, what is this? And then they'd use it back on me. And I was like, ew. But it resulted in better dynamics.
Yeah. Was that scary at first? Like what did it take to even, again, I want to kind of like peel another layer back. How did you learn that? And then how did you come about to have, maybe the courage to do that? Because I feel like some of those moments, like that takes a lot to actually even do that.
How did I learn it? I've been reading a lot of, I read a lot. I love to learn. I love to, I love to learn. A lot of it started with business books, and then it went into self-development books. And then it went into studying NLP, which is a great way to break down language. So we have an internal dialogue of everything it is that we experience. So I'm looking at you, I'm thinking, oh, that's a really nice painting. I like the color scheme. Other people might be saying, what's that color? Like, what is the painting all about? So everyone's having their own experience based on what they're seeing and experiencing with their senses.
Okay.
For me, I could be saying, oh, wow, the air conditioning is really cold. Somebody could say it's a perfect temperature. So our mind is always talking, just whether or not we choose to tune into what we're actually saying.
Yeah. I think, again, going back to sort of the differences between the two of us and how we approach, I think when I first started to learn that I could be conscious of my language and my behavior and my how I spoke to myself, I started that journey kind of putting stickies everywhere and places in my bathroom, in my kitchen, and still to this day I have them sort of around the place. I've kind of almost like just little flags or reminders. I also set things in my phone that would reminders that would come up, during the day to be like, think about this or how are you looking at this today, or do you feel aligned today, or whatever, you know, different language at different times. That certainly progressed. And that for me was my approach to sort of how do I catch myself in these moments. And even actually, if I look at it from an artistic point of view, when I first went through my kind of tough time, I was writing a lot of poetry and songs that were very, you know, laden in pain and suffering. And they were really talking about kind of the things from a dark place. And as I started to learn more about, you know, and I'm mixing in other topics that I know we're going to touch in coming weeks, but, you know, manifestation and, you know, your words and what you say and think being your future, and all of this kind of how it's all the same thing from different angles. So I started to shift how I was writing and what I was writing about, so that I felt that I wasn't, you know, to some degree staying in the same vibration of what I was talking about. I think, you know, if you wake up every day, I always think of Pretty Woman, that amazing scene where she's like, right at the end, I think, where she's writing her, you know, her and Kit DeLuca are talking about basically if someone keeps telling you the same thing, you start to believe it about being shit and a prostitute and a bad, you know, not a bad human, or however that was pitched in the movie. And I think about that a lot in terms of like, if we wake up every day and think, you know, well, you know, my life is terrible and this is shit and I'm never going to get anywhere, you know, you're probably not going to. And whilst that might seem like a very strong comment, you know, like the future is really programmed by how we feel and how we think. So for me, from an artistic point of view, I started to drill that into what I painted, what I wrote about, so that I could feel that I was shifting that conversation instead of being stuck in the pain.
Yeah. I mean, if you were to look at the 5 closest people that you had around you, the big 3 people that you love being around and 2 people that you don't like being around. And if you were to write down the regular language that they use and what they choose to focus on, you'll start to get a pretty clear picture of who's a happy person and what does a happy or what does a resourceful person do and say versus what does an unresourceful person do and say. And there's something in the mind called the reticular activating system. So it's how our brain processes pieces of information.
Okay.
And the biggest example that I can tell you is look around the room and look at something yellow. Find the yellow thing.
Okay.
And then now tell me what's red in the room. Without looking. That's cheating.
I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to look.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So this is where what becomes aware for you. And the same thing happens when you buy a car.
Yes.
You fall in love with this car and you've not seen it before you fall in love with it, and then you buy it and then you see it everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah, I feel like I've heard that before. Yeah.
And it's the same thing with language. It's if you keep on saying everything's terrible, even if it's the smallest thing, it's like, I missed the train. Oh, it's terrible. How terrible. You're just going to focus on labeling everything terrible, and you're going to look for things that are terrible because it's in your focus.
Yes.
And you're probably not going to be walking around with a smile on your face. And then people are going to be actively avoiding you because you're in this terrible internal mind. Yeah. Whereas if you were curious, you'd be like, oh, I'm curious what today is going to bring me. Yeah. There's a little bit of optimism in the word curious, or excitement or investigation.
Yeah, fascinating. And what about, I know we talked about the 4 agreements, and for anyone that hasn't heard those before, it's be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, do your best, which I always find is hilarious, because if you've made it through the other ones, do your best seems so easy. And the last one being
don't make assumptions.
Yes, huge. And I think, like, can we talk about that a little bit? Like, not only just being impeccable with your word, about actually even too, I think you talked about sort of like the vibrational dissonance, that if you say, you know, like, I'm okay, but you're not really, you're going to feel the difference. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when we use language, there's absolute language and relative language. So if you were to say, everything's terrible, or bad things always happen to me, you're not going to feel good in your body. And that language, it's permanent and it's all encompassing. So let's just say you had an experience where you were angry. Somebody cut you off when you were driving, or somebody, pushed you on the train or something. And you're like, I'm angry. I am. They're two small words, but they're incredibly powerful. So it's all encompassing and it's permanent. So if you were to say, I experienced anger when somebody cut me off, that's a more accurate statement of the event that actually happened to I'm angry, I'm so pissed off that somebody cut me off. Because you're kind of reliving the experience.
Yeah. What about I feel? Does that have the same effect?
I feel it's kind of in the moment, like I feel anger, or I experienced anger in the moment when somebody cut me off.
Yeah.
Like, which one feels better for you?
I think I feel, for me, and you talked about this a little bit in the beginning, kind of coming into meditation too, if we sort of tie some things together. I think I feel angry, but knowing also those feelings aren't me and they don't own me, and I'm not them, they are not me, and that feelings come and go makes it less permanent. And I think also I could put some space between it, like right now I'm feeling the frustration of something, or I'm feeling the anxiety of something, so I can feel into it. And almost, I think what's really interesting about the concept of awareness and this journey is it's as simple as breath. And it seems like something that if I literally get up on a stage in front of the world and be like, all you have to do is breathe, people, everyone will be like, you're fucking crazy. And that's like, it can't be that simple, but it really is that simple.
Mm.
And
it
so
really, and when you're in the moment and you're using the words I feel, that's an accurate description of, like, I feel anger versus I am angry. Like, I feel anger is a way better way of expressing it.
Yes.
If you're talking about a past event, then leave the experience of the emotion in the past as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So that, I think that's the biggest difference for me. It's like, when people say I'm angry, and you're like, well, why are you angry? Because somebody cut me off on the way to work. And you're like, you're still angry about that?
Yes.
Like, how is that impacting the rest of your day?
Yes. Well, it's interesting. There's that story about the monk, or the two monks that are walking along, and then they get to a riverbank or something, and there's an old monk there that says, "Can you?" Or a woman, I think it is actually, and she says, "Can you help me get across the river? I can't go on my own." So one of them carries her over, and then the other monk for like the next 10 miles is like. And then he's like, what's wrong with you? And he's like, well, you're not supposed to do that, carry that woman. And he's like, well, you're still carrying her, because literally the second guy is still mad that the first guy carried her over when he'd put her down and left her ages ago. And I think, we think about that. What, can we apply that to something though that is like a trauma of great substance, or a great, I think we all have stuff from our childhood and stuff from even, our recent years that feels like it's heavy enough to feel the burden of wanting to carry it and continue in it. How does this sort of play into stuff like that?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. And it's a complex answer in terms of how to resolve it. We have a central nervous system, and humans are built to survive. So anything that threatens our survival, our central nervous system is going to pick up. So if you've had a whole lot of experiences in childhood that consistently told you that you weren't safe, even though you as an adult today know that you're 99.5% safe in all circumstances, it's your central nervous system which is still carrying around those that response or that reaction. And it did it because it had so many instances in childhood when it happens.
Right.
So in terms of releasing it from the central nervous system, so that's, you've got to release it from the body. So you've got to express it from the body. And there are studies that have been done now to prove that, particularly with PTSD, that doing yoga actually does help release it from the body.
Yeah.
And what yoga does also, it gets the mind-body connection back.
Yeah.
So in today's day and age, we're so in our heads, like everything.
Yes.
Very logical, cerebral. We're doing so much. We're moving around. We're making a lot of decisions. We're really disconnected from our body and from our feeling.
Yeah.
And yoga is a great way to process memories that you don't know. I know we've spoken about this before, where we'll just be in a yoga pose and we'll just be sobbing for no reason at all. And you're like, well, I guess it had to come out.
Yes. That was always like the hip openers or whatever, the pigeon or something for me, that I'd literally be bawling my eyes out and be looking at me and I'm like, I don't know. But I think, you know, it's something in there and something that's been kind of working its way out. Yeah. What about someone that can't do yoga? Like, I think for me, I always look at too the artistic practices. I certainly know that painting, you know, dancing or movement, whatever level you can, you know, singing, vibrational things like that, you know, have they talked about that as part of that sort of process of being able to sort of reset the nervous system? Is that safe to say?
Off the top of my head, I wouldn't have any studies, but I know that through yoga and through doing sound baths, there are definitely, like, they say that we're 70% water.
Yes.
So the minute you get vibration close to the body, it's resetting the cells. And if we're going to talk about Dr. Bruce Lipton, so he does a lot of work about DNA and cells and thoughts releasing chemicals and what that activates in the body. So healthy thoughts, healthy body, negative thoughts lead to stress, lead to cortisol, lead to negative expression of cells and genes based on how people live their life.
Right. Yeah. It's fascinating how it's all connected. I can definitely see the sound vibrations too. I know that for me, the sound bath, something like that, is so powerful to sort of like, I don't know, shift the funk that gets stuck in there in a way that we can maybe even with our mind not understand how, you know, how that is even possible, but we know it works. Yeah. There's kind of you know, we could get into this in another subject too, like the concept of faith is part of this. You know, there's sort of a belief in that if I do this every day, this will lead me somewhere. And we are being led, you know, blindedly to some degree through all of these processes that, you know, whether it's from the repeat of science and you know, examples around us, to also just maybe that belief or innate feeling inside of us that we know that if we follow some of these practices, we will find peace within ourselves.
Yeah, there's something that I've read recently that was quite interesting. And the premise is that essentially the entire universe is run off laws. So the law of gravity, sound, light, they all have principles and they all work consistently. So is there a law of thought? And when you think about all the thoughts that you have more than 70,000 thoughts a day. And because you have so many of them, you probably don't pay attention to them all. But if you only had 6 thoughts a day, what 6 thoughts would you choose to actually think?
Yeah, how powerful is that? Yes. Yeah. I think that, you know, as thoughts come into your manifestations, I think that that's a, you know, a great way to look at how you can feed your kind of life story with things that you want by the thoughts that you have. And you know, I think there's a little bit of permission too that we often have to come to in this journey of allowing ourselves to believe that we're worthy and we have enough value here to get what we want and to kind of fulfill our dreams and go in the direction that we want to. Yeah.
And would you say that that's an inside job for you?
Oh, 100%. Everything. Yeah, I think everything is an inside job. You know, I think that looking with a very, very close but gentle eye on who I am and why I do things, and even why I want things. You know, if we go back to the childhood triggers, you know, it's a very intricate sort of web of like, you know, I feel this because I believe this. I want this, but I can't get this because I think this. you know, you can literally just follow the daisy chain around and knowing that, okay, so if I can just break the chain in one direction and shift one thought, then I have the possibility, like it's really that simple, to adjust the chain to look like something different so I can start a new chain.
Yeah. And how often would you have to adjust that thought for that chain to change, do you think?
I mean, I think it's every minute, every day.
Okay.
I mean, if I'm honest, you know, and I think, you know, over the last few months, for me, I spent a lot of time on my own. And certainly, as we've all been sort of in this situation, I am with myself and my thoughts all day long. And I think it takes a lot of, sometimes I don't know if I'm like brave or crazy in doing that, because it is something that, you know, can really put you on the edge of, like, you know, being conscious in every minute of your day, in everything you think, what you, and then what you think about what you think, you know, it can be a sort of cycle. And then, you know, what you eat, what you say, how you feel, and having the courage in each moment to sort of tune in, to slow down. I think maybe you mentioned this at the beginning, to really have the courage to slow down so that you can actually then decipher what is yours and what's somebody else's stuff, and then maybe the collective and societal, and actually be like, okay, this is just me, and right now I am safe and I'm comfortable, and what do I need to feel better? Okay, maybe I need food, maybe I need sleep, you know, almost starting through the chakras and being like, what do I need just from a basic security comfort level, and then what do I need to sort of you know, entertain myself. It might not be the right word, but sort of, you know, going up, I need expression, or I might need conversation, or compassion, or company, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? How was your daily process of knowing, again, we come to it differently? What is that like for you in terms of how do you step through your thoughts every day?
Right now, I've reached a certain level of momentum where I'd say most of the time my thoughts are neutral or resourceful,
Mm-hmm.
which, you know, over a long period of time, that's happened, and, you know, through various modes of study and career change. Um, from a, what does it look like on a daily basis? If I'm in a new situation and I'm having either a freeze response to it, or I'm not quite sure why it doesn't feel that good, I get curious. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, what does this remind me of? So I'll go through the situation and I'll be like, that situation technically wouldn't make a lot of people feel the way that I'm feeling right now. So, what is it about the pattern in the situation? And what does it remind me of in my
Mm.
childhood?
Interesting. You go straight back. And is this like momentary, or is this like in the middle of a coffee shop, sit down and write, you know, kind of assess it?
This will be, so let's just say I've had an interaction with somebody new, and then I'll be like, at the time it was great, but then afterwards I'll start to just feel a little bit off about it. And then
Mm-hmm.
I'll review what happened. And then for me now, with the work that I do, it always comes back to childhood.
Yeah.
Like, you know, from the ages of 0 to 7, essentially all our life experiences and what a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old would have rationalized those life experiences as.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't review them, you're going to be triggered based on what you're experiencing in your adult life.
Right.
And a great example is when you see somebody at work just having a tantrum. Like, they could be like a middle-aged man or woman, or any age, and they threw a tantrum as a child and it got them what they wanted, and they continue to throw tantrums as adults.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is as simple as that. Like, it's a
Mm.
learned behavior
Mm-hmm.
where they knew that they could get their way, and they honestly believe that that's the only way to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So we have habits of action from our childhood and habits of responses from our childhood.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think somewhere in my study it came along like, what's the payoff from the behavior that I'm doing right now? And I think that kind of, for me, kind of clicks in with what you're saying, is going back, you know, when you're a kid, you had a tantrum, then you got taken care of, or someone did it for you maybe, or you know, so you could see how that would play out in a concept. And I think about that within myself too, you know, what is it that I'm, you know, I think I often think about myself when people ask, you know, how am I doing and what am I up to or whatever, I'm always like, I have a very deep response. It's not just like I'm good or I'm bad or whatever. Like, you know, for me, it's very layered because I'm, you know, kind of looking at my life in such a sort of deep fashion. And I'm like, I'm curious now as we talk about this, like, how is that related to my past of like never maybe feeling like I was heard or I had to, you know, just buck up and be okay. So therefore now it's like, well, actually, this is how I feel, and this is what I'm working through, and this is what I'm dealing with. And you know, to some degree, you know, without making assumptions, some people aren't interested in that level of depth. So it's sort of more than how do you approach kind of your responses in certain, you know, situations more than others.
Yeah. And some people don't want to know. They're uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable about it because that might mean that they need to address some problems that they don't want to face, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I think, you know, in many conversations that we've had, it's like once you start peeling back the layers, it's almost like you can't stop.
Yes, very
Just
true.
something that you just continue to do.
Yeah.
And the more you do it, the greater the level of awareness you get, and the quicker your ability to understand and process things.
Yeah, catch things in the thing. You know, I think to repeat, the best way to change behaviors is to catch them, you know, in the act. It's kind of almost like with a kid. If you catch it in the act of doing something, I think it's actually with dogs, maybe again with kids, but like if you catch you can't beat a dog up. Sounds terrible, but if you can't tell a dog off for peeing its pants on the floor later because it doesn't make the connection, but it's only when it happens in the moment. And I think that's something that for me of knowing these things that come back around, there's something for me to learn. So then it's being, you know, aware to catch myself in the moment as I change things. Just touching, are there any other sort of habits or behaviors that you see you've identified that are sort of around you know, kind of increasing your awareness or being more aware? Are there any other things sort of in a practical sense that people could look at? Because I think, you know, a lot of when you're working through this stuff, you know, you maybe get to a place where it's just second nature for you. So someone that's brand new in something, they're just like, well, you, in my mind, I'm like, well, just stop doing it. But it's not that simple. And it took me a while to get to this point that I am aware, whilst there are still things that go around that loop. You know, that awareness is really, you know, it's a muscle too. It's like you don't just go to the tennis court and expect to be Serena Williams. You got to work on it. So it's part of that.
Exactly. So one exercise that people could do is if they took everything that they said to themselves and their narrations and they imagined that that was a person standing next to them, what would they say to that person? Would they say, you're my best friend, I love you? Or would they kind of say, you just need to go and disappear?
Right.
So it's almost like just taking the thoughts and visualizing them as a person, and imagine having somebody say that to you. Would you actually say what you say to yourself to somebody else?
Yeah.
So let's just say you wake up and you go, oh, wow, I look terrible. My eyes are puffy. My thighs are looking a little chubby. Look at that cellulite. Like, would you say that to somebody else?
Yeah.
And if you wouldn't say it to somebody else, then why would you say it to yourself?
Right.
And instead of saying that, you could go, okay, I only got 3 hours sleep last night, and I've been eating poorly and drinking poorly, and I haven't been going to the gym. They're more facts. And then you kind of go, am I going to do something about it? And then if you're not going to do anything about it, accept it. And if you don't want to accept it, then decide to change it and do something about it.
Yeah.
But this whole beating yourself up cycle, I think like we get ourselves into these cycles where we beat ourselves up.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy, but it's a habit and it's on autopilot.
Yes. Yeah, we straight away look at ourselves. It's interesting as we go back to the beginning of the conversation around the emotion again, to pull that out and actually be objective. You know, like, here's the thing, you know that every single day you wake up doing that. So you can either start drinking more water, go to the gym, or, you know, not to say shut up, but like kind
But
of
it is,
look at it
it's
from
like,
a
oh,
sense,
yeah,
yeah, like from an unemotional place. It's not like,
yeah.
you know, beating yourself up with a whip, you know, but it's more just like, okay, or I can just stop doing this to myself. It's not helping. It's not, I'm not getting skinnier and more water and more sleep by having that go at myself. So it's kind of breaking that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just accepting where you are in the moment.
Yeah. 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 Really fascinating. What other sort of behaviors or language sort of things have you picked up on yourself?
Um, Great. Let me think. A recent thing that I've been focusing on is acknowledging myself for what I actually have been doing.
Mm,
I think,
wow.
you know, I know a lot of achievers. I know you're an achiever,
Yeah.
and we have these big goals, and you're always looking at how to get to the goal, and you never stop and look back and go, okay, wow, I've really come a long way
Mm-hmm.
this, and actually just sitting down and writing down a list of everything it is that you have achieved this year.
Yes.
It's going to fuel you. It's like the gas that's going to keep you going,
Yes.
as opposed to saying, I haven't done this yet. I haven't done this yet. I don't like the way that looks. I don't like the execution of this. This needs to be redone. It's like, well, you need to look at the game from where you started the year off to where you are now,
Mm.
and then move forward from that particular point of view.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. Everything is so connected. I think this is why that concept of the scarf and pulling about all of the things, because I think in that there's a language thing also. Um, if I think about sitting here and sort of beating myself of all the things I haven't done, it's also coming from a language and a perspective of lack, and actually seeing, you know, the half cup, half full, half empty. And if we are in a practice of actually noticing what we have done, then again, I think you say it becomes the fuel for what more that we could do. But for some reason, we're programmed, you know, to wake up and think about all the things that we haven't achieved. And whilst I think, you know, having a to-do list is great, and there are things that we need to get done by certain dates and times, the rest of it, you know, again, if we kind of lean into the faith and, you know, divine timing, there's a reason why a lot of things come into play and sort of slot in at certain times for us to be able to do things, and having the kind of comfort factor with that, also the language to be able to speak to ourselves differently, we can you know, maybe even progress more on the things that we need to do because we're in a different mind state.
Yeah, exactly. And I think so. When we go back, I probably want to just speak a little bit about affirmations. I know
Mm,
affirmations are such a big thing. And if you say, I'm happy, I'm amazing, and you're not feeling it on the inside,
mm-hmm.
there's something about you can try saying it for 5 minutes and looking at yourself in the mirror and see how you feel. And if you still don't feel like that resonates with you and it doesn't feel good on the inside, then use gentle words that will allow you to begin to feel happy.
Mm-hmm.
So, as opposed to saying, I'm happy or I'm amazing, you can say something like, I'm beginning to feel happy more and more every day.
Mm,
Because your body it can't really reject that because it's not an absolute statement.
right.
So I'm happy is an absolute statement, but I'm beginning to feel happy, or I'm beginning to get more awareness. And if you start saying, I'm beginning to get more awareness, you'll start to get more awareness.
Mm,
It's just that it's building up the momentum, and then one day you just say, "Oh, I'm aware all the time." Um, and what I'd recommend is choose one thing and repeat it for like 5 minutes a day for 30 to 60 days. And that's the amount of dedication that you need. And it's in one single block. So don't pick one line and say it for 30 seconds 5 times, 10 times a day or something. Really dedicate 5 minutes to it and kind of really just say, okay, I'm feeling amazing, or I'm always in the right place at the right time, or I'm beginning to always be in the right place at the right time, meeting the right people. I mean, I was using that, and I was at work, and I was at the reception just talking to the ladies about what I do, and this client overheard me, and she's like, "Can I book with you now?" And I was like, "Oh, cool." Well, that's the right time, saying the right things.
Love that.
And you start to find those little, synchronicities happening.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, because I think it's everybody resonates with different things. I find myself with and it's so multi-layered in a sense. Like, I find myself with affirmations that I do 3 or 4 minutes, and then I like doodle off, and I think that, okay, so maybe that's not my way of reaching awareness. And I think having also gentleness with yourself around that, like, some things will resonate. We're aiming to do these talks to talk about sort of every possible way that people can look at it, and part of it is just sort of opening your mind in some way, but something will resonate. Some people like poetry, some people like paintings. It's really that simple. And I think for me, this journey in how do we sort of find the things that we resonate with, so that we can stick to something, and I think when you say to most people about doing something for 30 to 60 days, they're like, well, that's a lot, and but I really feel like, if unless and this is not, again, with a sort of like, unless you do this, you're not going to get anywhere, but like, really, unless you train and play tennis every day for 30, 60 days plus more, you're probably not going to play tennis very well, if not at all. And also, if it's not really resonating, you're not even going to stick with it. So I think it's such an interesting thing. And I look at some of the practices that for me have stuck. I really made an intention for myself a couple of years ago to paint every day and to do something like artistic every day. I also sit by my bed every night and say my prayers and write poetry, and kind of write some sort of, I don't know, conversation with myself in a poetic way to wrap up my day, or to say thank you, or however it is. And, that takes commitment. There's many times that I'm like tired, drunk, whatever, want to just literally crawl into bed and not do it. But even if it's for 1 second, that muscle has been built to being like, I know this is part of my future, and this is a commitment that I've made to myself. And this is, like you say, paying off in synchronicities in other ways that you might not always see. And
Yeah.
I think, that practice and commitment, it takes a lot. And finding something that really feels good is going to bring about more magic that will come from that.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing that you said is, it is a muscle.
Yes.
And a lot of people will go, okay, I'm not feeling good right now, so I'll do it a little bit, so I feel better, and then I stop.
Yes.
And then so they go like this throughout their,
Yes.
as opposed to building up and up like this.
Yes.
And it comes back to, if you look at professional athletes,
Right.
from a very young age, from the age of 3 to 5, they've been drilled into them. Like, they probably love the sport. They're naturally good at it. They've had everyone around them supporting them, and they're focused on what it is that they must be doing.
Yes.
They're focused on the perfect shot.
Yes.
Whereas, and then you compare the rest of us who have had these childhoods where maybe parents work 6 or 7 days a week, raised by a single parent, people weren't around at the time that you needed them. So therefore, that's going to lead to low-level prolonged trauma, which most people would say, I didn't have a bad childhood. I had a great childhood. There's nothing for me to complain about. But when you're experiencing low-level trauma or confusing messages and inconsistency about when you get attention, that's why you get inconsistencies in your adult life. Because you have messages in your subconscious mind.
Yeah, it's really amazing. It's so I think it's beautiful to dig into this stuff and to look at it. And I also can imagine, it's scary for people to shine the light on the dark spots, on the shadows, to really look at this stuff. But I think that what is on the other side of going into, the pain, the fear, the unknown is really quite magical. And, you know, I use magical a lot, but I think it has many meanings for many people. In a sense, it's enlightening, it's freeing, it's comforting, it's illuminating, it's many things. And I think, you know, to be in a place where we can interact with people without being sort of like pinged every minute, or we can move forward in the career that we want, or we can, you know, raise our children how we want, or we can, you know, affect our communities how we want, because we know that this is what we're meant to be doing. Being able to do that in a free flowing way, because we've almost you know, taken the thorns out of the roses, you know, in learning about ourselves and what it is that makes us kind of get stuck, then all of a sudden, you know, those things don't seem so scary. Well, you know, maybe in sort of summary, knowing that we could probably talk about this for hours and we want to kind of touch base on a little bit something different each week, is there, like, what was it for you that gave you that push to look in the dark spots? Like, how did you have the courage to do that?
It all started when I just found myself in the same situation again. And I was like, I've had enough of this.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're the common denominator in the same situations with multiple different people, you're like, okay, the problem's me.
Yes.
Or part of it's me.
Yes.
And that's when, you know, I realized how negative my internal dialogue was.
Right.
And, you know, maybe it was just negative in a survival way.
Mm-hmm.
And that survival, so sometimes that negative dialogue can generate success in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And then at a certain point, it backfires on you. And
Yeah.
then you need to change it. And that's something that's really hard to unlearn because it's confusing.
Yes.
So when I see the same situations happening with multiple different people, that's when I kind of go, okay, what is it about me that needs to change in these situations?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about you?
I think it's really amazing just listening to you and how much I'm like, whoa. I think for me on the business side, it happened in two different ways. I think between business and personal, I was in a job, and whilst I never really looked at myself as sort of like a ball busting boss, you know, I definitely was very masculine energy, and a lot of that from a fear base, because I was trying to be brilliant and perfect and amazing, you know. But I actually had a colleague that said to me that I was, I wish I could remember the exact words because it was very harsh, but very arresting and very amazing, but was really something like, you know, you're really horrible to be around, and the way you lead and you're a boss is horrible. And I mean, horrible is actually a really nice word. It was a lot more stronger than that. And that for me was like, holy fuck. Like that was probably, I think, and looking back, as you know, we cross into the astrology a little bit too, that was sort of 2012-ish.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it's really interesting that that came around, you know, when you think about like Saturn returns and some, you know, Jupiter and stuff like that, there's a lot of moments where that was a real kind of cross point for this sort of awareness or awakening. And so from there, that's what started my professional awakening, I would say, in how I was as a leader. And it sort of then exposed something that I could actually see my fear-based behavior around sort of interactions with certain bosses and things was like, I was so scared to be myself because of certain things, but actually that was about my confidence with myself and the trust in myself. So, you know, it was kind of such an inverse relationship. As I started to learn more trust with myself, my confidence went up, which meant that the way I handled interactions was different, and the way I became more aware of who I was in those roles kind of heightened. And then I think, you know, probably 2018 is where I had the personal stuff, which is, again, you know, we talked about anything that you don't pay attention to comes back and hits you on the head even bigger. And for me, you know, that was in the personal side where I was, you know, just like a bat out of hell, not listening to my instincts, had no self-worth, and kind of drew in a situation that helped bring it to its knees so that I could actually finally see kind of the depth of who I was and how I participated in those relationships to say that I don't want to live like this ever again.
Right.
You know, really brought me to the work that I do today.
So you really owned that though. Like I remember, like you really owned it and you really spent time in it and you were like, it is me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I think if I think about like the crux of my work and what I believe I'm here to do sort of on this planet and as I interact with businesses and people, it's really, if we are so truthful with this stuff, it literally just dissipates. And whilst the sort of muscle still needs to be worked around how to sort of work work through things or retrain ourselves, but the minute we are 100% truthful with ourselves, like really truthful down to like the nth degree, it all disappears. And part of our, you know, that non-truth, I think, comes from like maybe even an identification, like what would I be if I'm not that, you know, which goes back to the payoff maybe around, you know, if I can't be that type of boss and this type of thing, and I, you know, and I'm this and this, then I'm not that, therefore who am I and what value do I have? Like it's really beautifully intricately connected.
It is. It's all the power of language.
Yes, right back to the start. So thank you. That was an amazing conversation. And, you know, I thoroughly enjoy these sort of back and forths. And I think that, you know, the reason why I felt drawn to speak to you about this is to really look at the practical elements of who we are and what we do and how we can provide, you know, guidance for us as two people that have been through it and are going through it and are training and learning and studying, how that we can share the really, really basic practicalities. Because I think, you know, it's like you can't, when you get woke, you can't go back. And, you know, there are times when I wish I could like wake up all day and just pretend I'm not thinking in this like new bound way, but you can't do it. You know, there's no winding the clock back. And so part of that, I think, is a humbleness in honoring how we got here so that we can share that journey, so that we can bring others along. And I think that is for the pure purpose that if we all raise our consciousness, you know, the planet becomes a different place. And that really is why we're all here as humans.
Yeah, beautiful.
So
Thank you for
you're welcome.
thank you for facilitating is what I meant to say.
I love it. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for being honest and showing up and you know, just really honoring and mirroring back just what you've done and how I've seen that grow in you. And it's been beautiful to be part of that. So let's keep it going. And for anyone that wants to join us next week, we will be back with some more random conversations about how to raise your consciousness, how to become aware, how to change your mind, your brain, whatever, all of that stuff.
Amazing. I look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for joining, everyone, and have an awesome day. Bye.